Welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm Rafael Carmona from the AAA ICDR. And before we begin, I'd like to take a moment of your time to remind you that you can join as an ICDR Young and International or Y&I Associate. If you Google us, ICDR Young and International, you'll find our website where you'll find registration forms in English and in Spanish. You will also find the recordings of all of our previous webinars. Also, we have a LinkedIn group, again, ICDR Young and International. You can request to join, and we'll be posting also all of our updates there. I also want to take a moment to thank the Moot Alumni Association. This is our 7th installment of our diversity series. This is a topic that we take very seriously, and in particular, we take into account disability as one of the forms of diversity that we take into account, for example, when we prepare a list of potential arbitrators, and we want to include, of course, diverse candidates. So we're more than happy to keep supporting this initiative. With that very brief introduction, I want to give the floor to our moderators, Tess Benz and Courtney Lotfi. So Tess, Courtney, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rafael. And also thank you to the ICDR for hosting us again. Indeed, it's already the 7th installment of the series that we've been doing. My name is Tess Benz. I currently work as a research assistant at the University of Vienna. And apart from that, I have been co-chair of the Moot Alumni Association's D&I committee for the past 4 years, together with Shashi Dolandes. And about 4 years ago, we came up with this idea that we wanted to do a series in which we can give a voice to people in marginalized communities within the broader arbitration fields. And in that context, we have done topics like LGBT, being LGBT in arbitration, being Black in arbitration, being Asian in arbitration, and now finally the topic on what is essentially, hopefully, disability inclusion, but we nonetheless put it under the name of ableism in arbitration. And for those who may be a bit unfamiliar with the terminology, ableism is typically defined as discrimination or prejudice against people who have disabilities. And ableism can take the forms of ideas and assumptions, stereotypes, attitudes, practices, or certain physical barriers in the environment. And the worst thing about it is that it often happens unintentionally. Most people are completely unaware of the impacts of words and actions, but also of the environment, like how accessible is a building, for example. It's the topics that we will get to in a minute. Now, the thing with these being in arbitration webinars is that we always try to select panelists who are from the community itself, go for as much diversity in that as possible, and that includes the moderators. In my case, I've been diagnosed with ADHD and autism about 12 years ago. And for me, that has in various ways affected my career. We'll also get to that. With this, I would like to give the floor to Courtney and the panelists to also introduce themselves and explain a bit more about who they are and why they are here.
Thank you, Tess, and thank you to the ICDR and to the MAA. I echo your thanks, Tess, in that respect. I think it's a great topic for discussion that we have lined up today. As you indicated, my name is Courtney Lotfi. I'm of counsel at Jones Day. I practice international arbitration with a specific focus in commercial arbitration, usually involving continental Europe and the United States, something of that nature. Since we're disclosing what superpower we have, I'd like to call it a superpower. I am dyslexic. When I was younger, it was not classified as dyslexia, so that shows that sort of definitions change. It was a problem or sort of a difficulty learning how to read because I didn't understand certain sounds. So I had trouble figuring out what was on the written page. Clearly, I've learned to deal with that, and it doesn't negatively affect my work, quite the opposite, because I remember things that I hear, because that's how I started learning. But I'm sure we'll get to all of this later. And I'd like to now take the time to introduce our other panelists, and I'll do so in the order in which they are on my screen. Let's start with Paolo. Paolo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Courtney, and thanks, Tess, both of you for inviting me today. I'm Paolo Vargiu. I'm an associate professor of international law at the University of Leicester, a member of the Italian bar, and when I get appointed, an arbitrator as well. And my superpower, let's go with the flow, Courtney, is the fact that I don't walk, I just roll. 10 years ago, roughly, I lost the ability to walk or have balance, basically, due to a very nice tumor in my spinal cord, which decided within 3 days to show up, give me some pain, and then just made the rest of the body stop working. And so you can't see it, and that's something, one of the points that I will touch today is how COVID has sort of equalized things, because if you see me like this, you just see the old boring white male. If you see me live, there's no way for me to hide my other characteristics. And yeah, it's great to be here and can't wait to touch upon the discussion.
Welcome, Paolo. Erin, you're next on my screen.
Yes, good evening or, well, good morning. I don't know where everyone is joining from. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. My name is Erin Cronjé. I'm a South African national and a South African qualified attorney. I worked in top-tier law firms in Johannesburg for about 6 years. And for the past 5 years or so, I've been working at De Brouwer Blackstone Westbrook in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, practicing international arbitration. And in addition to that, I'm also a director of an organization called Africa in the Moot, which is a separate aspect of diversity and arbitration. But 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with remitting relapsing multiple sclerosis. It was, of course, an interesting diagnosis to come to terms with, because whether you, well, there's a lot to talk about with MS, but you know, it's one of those illnesses that really can affect everything. It obviously attacks the central nervous system, so potentially it can, in very unpredictable ways, affect you in many physical forms and also psychologically and mentally. So I've been fortunately in remission from my last episode for the past 3.5 years, which is really wonderful, and generally doing well with it. And it's been an illuminating experience, confronting what it's like to live with MS, and not just live, but practice with MS, which we'll get into during the discussion, I'm sure. So thanks very much. Looking forward to talking with you.
And Veronica.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, first of all, hello, good afternoon. Here I'm from Argentina, Buenos Aires. As Courtney mentioned, my name is Veronica Sandler. I teach investment and commercial arbitration, as well as corporate practice at the University of Buenos Aires and other universities here in Argentina. I usually travel regularly around Latin America to teach and speak about international arbitration. And well, I am 43 years old at the age of 26. Some 27 years ago, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease of the nerve system. The disease is known as multiple sclerosis, which I will call from now MS or superpower, as Courtney mentioned. So like Erin, this is a disease that is has not cured yet for the moment. So in my particular case, over the time, that condition, my condition, may result in visible problems, like problems with mobility, vision, or cognition problems, like among others, of course. And I have been lucky because, except for some temporary flares-ups, the disease was expressed only in losing some feelings in my fingers. So, well, for me, it's the first time I have spoken in public about my disease. So I'm a little nervous about that because, well, nobody except my near family knows about my condition, not even my nearest colleagues. So, well, my public person is a perfectly healthy 43 years old woman. So, well, why is that selection? I think it's the idea to talk about this here. And well, it's a better pleasure for me to be here and share all this experience.
Welcome, Veronica. And our last panelist is Nikola Nikolic. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Courtney, Tess, Raphael, and thank you to the ICDR for organizing this event. My name is Nikola Nikolic. I'm a research assistant at 7th Summit Arbitration in Munich. I'm working part-time here in the office, and parallelly to my work, I'm also doing my PhD at Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich under the mentorship of Professor Klaus Sachs. I'm also a member of, or actually I was the member of the ICC Disability Task Force Group as a member of the German ICC chapter. And that was actually the initiative that opened the door to us, I would say, when I started my career in the field of international arbitration. That was 2019 in the Netherlands. I remember that this topic was kind of alien to many of law firms, and I'm happy that now we have the chance to speak more about that, and happy to share my experience in this regard. As most of you know, as it is already visible, I'm completely blind, and joining Veronica's initiative, I would also like to disclose something that I haven't been talking about in the last years. I also have hearing loss, so that is a combination that is definitely not ideal on the job market, but on the other hand, it's definitely not a barrier to work as anyone else. And I'm happy again that we will have the chance to speak about that in more details.
Thank you very much, Nikola. Now, before we move on, I would like to briefly return to the notion of superpower, because it is something that we touched upon in the previous discussion. Because I think, especially with certain forms of disabilities, especially more on the autistic spectrum, ADHD, it's perhaps a bit easier to consider it as a superpower. It's more of a mental thing. It's obviously also less visible, but yeah, it puts you apart from the rest in the way of thinking. But when we were talking to you, Nikola, you expressed that you did not necessarily feel it as a superpower. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Audio now unmuted.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, well, it is definitely a good thing to call it superpower, because actually when we combine our efforts and in order to catch up with our disability and to be able and more efficient at work, it's definitely a superpower, because at the end, altogether, that our effort and our knowledge brings us to the better result than our colleagues. At least that's my belief. The reason for which I would be, on the other hand, slightly reluctant to call it a superpower is that that gives actually an impression to our colleagues that, you know, we can do something much faster and better than anyone else. In its essence, as I said at the beginning, I do believe that our combination of effort and knowledge at the end brings us to a better result. But that doesn't mean that we can do our work much faster than anyone else. At least that is in my regard, as in my case, as I'm blind. So that happened to me a few times, that my bosses simply gave me an assignment and said, "Wow, he is blind and he managed to go so far." So definitely not only that he will deliver a good research or a good draft, but he will also do that much faster than anyone else. And I actually need more time for that. So that's actually the reason for which, again, I would be reluctant to call it superpower, or at least it is okay to call it like that, but then to give that further explanation, because our colleagues, there are some of our colleagues who would maybe misunderstand that term.
Thank you very much for the clarification. One of the other things that struck me during the introductions is that for most of us, or perhaps 50-50, it's the nature of your disability came up at a later stage during your career. And I think that in particular applies to Paolo. Like you've said, we also addressed that during the pre-discussion. I found a pretty interesting point, and perhaps it's also good to return to that. Like before you ended up rolling through life rather than walking through it, like what was your
Veronica's.
perception on the issue of disability and disability inclusion?
Well, my perception was basically non-existent. Other than being a nice person, not parking disabled bays and things like that, I never even considered how disability could impact a career in law. But I remember, and it's kind of creepy to think about that now, but well, a couple of years before this happened, I was sitting in my office and I saw a picture of a guy in a wheelchair. And first I thought, wow, that would be a tragedy. And then I thought, well, would it be a tragedy, actually? I mean, I don't actually use my legs to work. But my life is basically me in a library or an office, so that will probably not change much. And boy, was I wrong. I mean, walking, I mean, I always say, and people in wheelchairs usually agree with me, if they gave me a list of things that I could ask the proverbial genie in a bottle, walking back to work, going back to walking will not be in the top 5 on my choices, because my disability actually has paraplegia has a number of other issues that do affect the way I work, the way I live, the way I wake up in the morning, all of these sort of things. So walking, I'm okay with the chair. I mean, the chair is pretty functional. It's kind of lightweight, costs a lot of money, but it's basically my legs, so it's fine. But yeah, the one thing that really strikes me today after 10 years on the chair is that one of my biggest fortunes was that I became disabled after I had my PhD, after I had been appointed a few times as an arbitrator, after I was already a member of the community. So if a disabled student came to me today and say, hey, I want to break into arbitration, how do I do that? I will have no advice, because it's really hard for me to stay in the game as a disabled individual. And luckily, I was already part of the community when this happened. I'm not entirely sure that I would be anything other than academic if this happened this happened before getting the game. And there is one thing that always think about it quite often. I have as much of a right as anyone else to be appointed as an arbitrator, but I don't actually have the right to be appointed as an arbitrator. So whenever I get appointed, I'm very happy about that, obviously, even though it usually comes after a very gruesome process of questions that would not be asked to any other arbitrator, simply because my disability is so evident that screams danger. But at the same time, parties might not appoint me for a number of reasons, so it's never quite clear whether I missed out on an appointment because I'm disabled or simply because the party decided to go somewhere else. And that also creates some problems in thinking about inclusion. Am I being excluded because I'm disabled? Am I being excluded because I've written something in an article? I mean, that's the beauty of an academic is that I don't need to be appointed to make a living. The worst part of an academic is, and perhaps Veronica agrees with this, is that we publish, which means that whatever we think about legal issues, it's out there. So parties might even get to me because they read, oh yeah, we're not gonna appoint this guy. He doesn't think, we don't like the way he thinks. So it's kind of hard to talk about inclusion when it's not evident whether I'm excluded because of something I wrote or because of the way I look. Statistically, my appointments were going up before disability, then went down, then up again during COVID, and down again once people went back to things in person. So I'm pretty sure that it has an effect. I just can't quantify that effect.
Thank you very much. And I would like to tag on to both Erin and Veronica, because you both disclosed you have MS. Well, it has the same label, but can I assume on that basis that it means the same thing for you?
Yes, I don't know, Erin, if you want to start, of course.
Oh, you go ahead. You came off mute first, so I follow you.
Okay. Well, I think that maybe First of all, thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Tess, for this opportunity, because as I mentioned, it's my first time talking about this, about my superpower, and I'm totally happy to be here and talk with you and know all of you. So thank you so much for the invitation. So moving directly to your question, Tess, I think that maybe, as I mentioned, my election in general is not to disclose my condition. Why? Because as Paolo mentioned, of course, there is a bias. No, MS is a really unknown disease, and I think there is a perception that people with MS are disabled, cannot be an arbitrator, and they cannot compete. I think that there exists that perception that maybe people with MS cannot be an arbitrator or cannot be in charge of the proceeding. And I have been for years, so it's incredible. But I think there is an important bias on the MS disease. So I feel more comfortable with that decision for the moment, of course, because for me it's very difficult to talk and discuss about my personal condition, precisely because, as Erin mentioned, this disease, I think, is very particular because it's different in each case. It's very particular in each person, and I think so. There is no room for generalities about the disease. So. The point here is that I don't hide my MS, but I don't put it on a poster. So I think that the MS doesn't affect my professional career, because the answer is because I keep it hidden. So I don't know, it's something to talk about, but I think that the positive thing is that the MS has had an indirect effect on me, because first in stimulating me to create Women Wearing Arbitration. Women Wearing Arbitration is a not-profit organization which main objective is work with the inclusion of women in international arbitration, and in some point to help with the diversity and more diversity, more inclusion in the field of international arbitration. And second, for the opportunity to being a member of the drafting committee of the new ICC guide on disability and inclusion. So I don't know what the future will bring me, because as Erin said, this something like this is something that very difficult to explain, because I'm okay right now, but I don't know what will happen tomorrow. So it's very difficult to explain what you feel about that. No, but I think it's something that I see in a positive way. Because for the moment I can develop my profession without a particular problems connected with my MS. So I think that, well, that is for the moment my general comments in connection with my superpowers and the profession.
Erin, we have talked a bit about this because you are, if I remember correctly, you are a bit open about this also inside. You disclose it in general. Of course, you limit to whom you disclose it, but that also presents its own problems, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I was struck by what both Paolo and Veronica were saying on the point of disclosure. It's really a hit and miss process, you know, and that's the thing. In the first moment after diagnosis, I remember I couldn't even get the words out of my mouth because you're just in the shell shock of trying to come to terms with it yourself. And then, you know, you get surprised by a lot of people, and those surprises can be good and bad. And sometimes I was surprised by how much support and understanding there was from people who I not necessarily expected it from, but then also surprised in a disappointing way, where you share something and it's just well, I don't want to say used against you, but just not well received. So that's also been quite an important learning curve that I've had to go through, which I think is actually a valuable one for life overall, of learning who to trust with your information. And not everybody, also in the Brene Brown fashion, not everybody deserves your vulnerability. So you also have to learn to curate that. And I think indeed sometimes that can have adverse impacts because you can withhold too much, but sometimes people want to be able to help you. They would love to be able to help you. And it's about creating, I guess, psychologically safe spaces and in relationships too, not just in the workplace, to be able to share that properly. But, also just reflecting on my own experience since diagnosis. At the time I was diagnosed, there was a lot of activity and it was very, very concerning. But based on what the scans and things were showing, the doctors actually told me that I most likely had MS for 10 years and didn't even know about it. And I thought that was quite, again, there's the shell shock part that you have to go through. But I thought that nuggets of information of potentially having something for 10 years without knowing was actually part of the superpower, because as much as I was confronted initially thinking, oh my God, how can you be a lawyer with a brain disease? Like, these things are incompatible. But then I thought, wait a second, but I've been a lawyer with a brain disease for 10 years and I've been doing just fine. These are the most active 10 years of my career so far. So the only thing that changes now is that I know about it, and that means I can optimize and use it as a growth opportunity. So, maybe few of those, less of those crazy late nights at 3 a.m. and making sure you don't skip that lunch to meet a deadline, and just taking care of yourself as a lifestyle, which ultimately also makes you more productive if you look at the big circle of events. So I really tried from an early moment to look at it as a growth opportunity and just see, because it is incurable. You cannot change the fact of this diagnosis existence, but then you have a choice to either deal with it poorly or deal with it well. And, you can, again, have a choice between suffering or a quite happy, productive life.
Erin, listening to you, I'm reminded of a discussion we had during one of our sessions. I was also a member of the ICC Task Force on Disability Inclusion. And the discussion was whether or not we should recommend that people with disabilities disclose their disability. And there was a very stark contrast between those who were in favor of disclosure and those who were absolutely against it. And we found, it was quite interesting, we found that those who were against disclosure were the ones who had invisible disabilities, and those who maybe had them their entire lives. So those who had been trying to hide the fact that they had something that made them just a little bit different from everyone. And if you think back, I mean, when you were a kid, what did you want to be? You just wanted to be like everyone else, didn't you? And, curly hair, if you had curly hair and everybody else had straight hair, oh my goodness, that was the end of the world. So imagine if you tacked a disability on top of that. And I think what you're saying about choosing who you tell really strikes home for me. And I think that is a decision that everyone should be able to make for themselves. And trusting, there is a big level of trust there. Who I sort of have to trust the people that I would disclose this to, even though my disability doesn't really affect my work in any way. It's still something about me that is deep-rooted, that I remember not wanting people to know when I was a kid. And it's still with me to some respect, in some respect.
I think it also has to do with the kind of feeling that you start internalizing it. You start thinking, okay, when I'm not experiencing typical difficulties that I typically associate with this particular kind of disability, then there must be nothing wrong, or then I have to hide it. But that also creates a particular lack of role models. Like, it has been extremely difficult. We've been trying to put this panel together for 2 years, but it's incredibly difficult to find people who are actually willing to speak about this. And in my case, for example, I don't really disclose it unless it's really necessary. And then for me, it's a wholly different ballgame. Like one very good example was when I did an internship at a law firm and they figured, oh, we don't have enough desks. So one of the students gets lucky and gets to rotate desks every week. That's actually the most horrible thing that you can say to me. And I was the lucky student. And that's the point where I had to kind of like, yeah, you know, I have autism. I'm actually benefited by having a fixed spot to work from and not having to move around and having to readjust every single week. And then you kind of, it's kind of in that situation that you are kind of forced to disclose it. But apart from the disclosure discussion, I think one of the very important issues that we have to tackle is accessibility and the awareness of needs of professionals and clients with disabilities. And then I think it mainly goes here. We mainly talk here about the physical, visual, or audible kind of disabilities that affect the environment. And I would very much like to hear from Nikola, like, do you think that the broader field of arbitration, professionals working in the broader field of arbitration actually realize what the needs of people who are blind are?
Audio now unmuted.
Well, during my career, as I said, I started with my career in the field of international arbitration in 2019 at the same law firm at De Brouw in the Netherlands, like you, Tess. So I'm pretty sure that all of you have more stories to share, but my feeling is that generally they do. And during my career, there have been many people who have supported me, and without their support, I wouldn't be here where I am now. So I'm really thankful to them, and I do believe that many of them do understand what our needs are. But if I may share my biggest fear with all of you, and that is actually, and I'm speaking now for the first time publicly about that, I spoke with that only with some of my closest colleagues. I think that although many of them understand what our needs are, I'm afraid that also many of them are not willing to make jobs accessible to us. And I will just give you a few examples. When I was looking for a job, and that was a year and a half ago, and during that period, I also was declared of this additional disability when it comes to the hearing loss. Well, definitely altogether, that shook me emotionally, and I was struggling with that, but I was trying to hide that and to keep strong. I think that's always a recipe for the success. But, you know, many of my colleagues, they knew that, and that I'm blind. They even couldn't guess that I do have additional difficulties. And some of them, they told me, look, but as a blind person, you are actually not profitable for a law firm. The best would be simply to go to academia, because money are not important there. Some other colleagues told me, look, but when you submit your papers, you can't see the formatting. So most probably your boss will get a headache out of the formatting style. And that just tells me that, you know, although they understand, so simply they understand that I, as a blind person, need a bit more time. I also need support when it comes to formatting, so that visual point. So they do understand what my needs are, but again, I'm afraid that they are not willing to make the jobs accessible to all of us, because that could be easily done. I don't know how it is in other countries, but in Germany, every single person with a disability who is employed is able to request from the state financial aids for having an assistant, and that's actually a way how these obstacles could be easily surpassed.
But you kind of have to educate them on it, haven't you? Yeah.
Well, as I said, when I started, this topic was totally alien to the field of arbitration. No one spoke about that. I remember once when I was in an ICC, group discussion, someone mentioned people with disabilities, and then another partner said, well, you know, we do have to include them, but let's be honest, who has here disability? No one. So why we would, anyway, we have short time, and why we would waste our time on this topic? And I do think, so that was not maliciously, it's simply the fact that the more we are speaking about this, the more we are raising awareness of our needs, and I hope that our colleagues will be also more willing to support us on this way.
Thank you very much, Nikola. And in that respect, I would also like to turn to Paolo, because one of the points that you mentioned already in the beginning is the equalizing effect, basically, of the COVID area for you. Are you willing to elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, basically, and Courtney might remember this from the ICC sessions during the guidelines. I'm super open about my disability, basically because since I can't hide, I might as well just, you know, put everything on the table, make sure that my needs are evident. And on top of that, I remember that most of the problems that I've faced and I still face around the world is just due to people's ignorance. And it's not an accusation. I was as ignorant when I was able-bodied. So I might as well just be incredibly open and just put everything on the table, which has led to very peculiar experiences. I remember a council that they were thinking about appointing me, and one of the questions that they asked me was, I mean, I see you're paraplegic. Are you going to need frequent bathroom breaks? And I mean, my first answer was like, are you asking this to every prospective arbitrator? Is it just me because I look different? And obviously it was awkward. And I just said, no, don't worry. I mean, I just go to the bathroom like anybody else. I mean, as long as you don't feed me beer during the hearing, I'll be fine. But at the same time, I've seen the difference during COVID. I mean, there was a case that started in 2020 and finished within 2020. We were super efficient with that one. And out of a sudden, no one was asking me anything other than, have you got a reliable connection at home? That was the only question they were asking me. So it was a great equalizer because, as I said, I don't hide my disability. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. And I'm very much in favor of disclosure, which bear in mind doesn't mean that I think everyone should disclose it. I mean, to be fair, if you can hide it, do hide it, because it does affect appointments and job opportunities. So go ahead. In my case, obviously, I put it on the table, and I think that the great equalizer has been COVID, because if this is what you see, you don't see my wheelchair, and the moment you don't see my wheelchair, out of a sudden I'm no longer disabled. It's kind of annoying when I'm out and about, because people see the wheelchair, and until they speak to me and they see that I'm that open, all they see is the wheelchair. And again, it just happened this morning. Another example, I went out of class, and because I'm easily distracted, I just stayed outside of the room with my phone, just playing and checking my social media. And this colleague, who I had no idea what I was, I mean, she was from another school, looked at me and said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, I am." "Are you sure? Do you need any help?" I said, "No, I mean, I don't need any help. Why are you just asking me for help?" And I mean, I'm supposed to get used to that after a number of years, but I don't. So yeah, to that extent, COVID, even though it was a tragedy, I lost a couple of family members and a friend, at the same time, it sort of like put me back on an equal level playing field with everybody else. Now we're back to a situation. I mean, I'm looking forward to the Vis Moot now. I'm going on Friday. Not looking forward to be once again, most likely the only wheelchair amongst 10,000 people that will be there. And there are a number of firms where I can't enter on my own. There are a number of opportunities that I will just miss because I can't be hassled to go through the hurdles. And thank God Vienna is actually quite accessible for European capital, so that works. But yeah, effectively, it's not just the fact that disability is visible. It's also the fact that people seem to only see that once it's on display. And it's true for me, and it's physical, and everyone with a pinch of brain, and consider that we're lawyers, we should all be reasonably intelligent. So everyone knows that I don't need my legs to work. I can't even imagine the prejudice and the bias that people with perhaps ADHD or any sort of like mental disability might face. Because again, in my case, I get these weird questions, but as long as I can survive those questions without telling the lawyers what I actually think, I could get the appointment. But if I'm assuming that the situation is radically different from those. And I'm just going to abuse my powers and take another extra 30 seconds. In my case, as an academic, I get a lot of appointments to committees and things because I'm the token disabled. And frankly, if that was helpful in arbitration, I would suggest everyone to disclose it. The thing is that we work in a field where everything is confidential. So, I mean, no firm can actually use us as a publicity stunt. Yeah, I hired a disabled arbitrator, because they can't say it. They could hire disabled counsel and possibly put that in the top of every brochure and just give it an office somewhere with no actual work. So yeah, as I was saying before, my situation is quite privileged because, again, I don't have to deal with certain things. At the same time, I mean, I don't want to say it's tough, but it does affect the psyche at times.
Thank you very much. How is it for you, Erin? Also, with respect to, for example, has COVID done anything? I mean, with MS, I assume that you are also under medical treatment. You have to be away every now and then for medical care. Has the digital age, so to speak, also made your life in this respect easier?
I think, well, yeah, just on the first point of the medical care. So the specific treatment I take, I have every roughly 6 months or so, and that involves a day in the hospital for an infusion and maybe a couple of days for just napping and Netflix. Depends. But for COVID, I mean, I was diagnosed in November 2020, so right in the fun of the COVID pandemic. And then I did have to take a period of sick leave to physically recover and regain, feeling in my legs and so on. So I haven't actually, since I've been in remission, which was technically February 2021, I think, I haven't technically had disabilities with MS. It's more about coming to terms with living with it and practicing with it, as I mentioned in the intros. But certainly I do think COVID does help in the sense of self-protection. Like if you do have issues with, certainly as you had mentioned as well, Tess, with treatment, it can be immunosuppressing. That's how most of the MS treatments operate. So then, especially when there were all these different variations of COVID and there were different waves and so on, it does help to be able to sort of protect yourself at home. And then even with things like fatigue and so on, certainly now we've got this hybrid way of working and having, limited days in the office. That helps, it helps to have a couple of Zoom calls in your pajamas. Well, pajamas on the bottom, professional on the top. Of course, that's the golden rule from the pandemic. But it helps to be able to do that instead of sometimes, like what I did notice sort of when I started reintegrating back into the workplace and we were going into the office a few times for a week, you do get this extra load that you have to manage. But certainly, as I said, like at the moment, my perceived disability is invisible. So it's, nothing really changes from my experience.
And how's your experience in that respect, Veronica?
Yes, very similar to Erin. My treatments were pre-pandemic, and I'm currently only controlled by an annual resonance, and I have to make every year. So that is my situation. The same like Erin, is no visible disabilities. So that is the same situation, exactly the same. So.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to turn to also the broader topic. I mean, we've been discussing problems now a lot, but let's also start looking a bit into the way forward, because one important impetus for also organizing this conversation now was the launch of the 2023 ICC Guide on Disability Inclusion. What I liked about reading it first is that it really put emphasis on reasonable efforts and also takes a quite comprehensive view on disabilities. And from your perspective, what is the role of initiatives like these, and what else should be done in promoting disability inclusion in arbitration? Nikola, would you like to start on it?
End meeting or leave meeting. Window. Leave webinar button. Audio now unmuted.
Okay, sorry for this, the technological issue.
Audio now unmuted alert.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I'm personally very thankful to Mrs. Claudia Solomon for her initiative to start disability task force group at the ICC. I think it was a huge step, as I said, just 5 years ago, and let alone I can't imagine how it was 10, 15 years ago to our older colleagues. This topic was when I started doing arbitration, this topic was totally alien, and no many people spoke about this. So I think that this initiative actually opened the door to all of us who have some kind of disability, or as you wish, a superpower. That actually spurred then the chain of promotions, in a sense, of public discussions, panels, and also I have seen more and more blogs and posts on internet regarding this topic. So I think that initiatives like this and also conversations like this, not only that can open the door to us and to become more visible, and also correspondingly to get our place in the field of arbitration. But I think that I'm convinced that these initiatives make arbitration more accessible, and actually accessible to all of us. Although I said there are many colleagues who understand our needs, unfortunately, my fear is that some of them, as I already mentioned, not quite willing to make the world of arbitration also accessible to all of us. And I think this is the way how we can change it.
What about you, Veronica?
Yes, I only to add something to what Nikola mentioned, that I think that maybe professionals in the field of international dispute resolution maybe are not enough aware of the real needs of professionals and clients with disability in this circumstance. But this situation is not only or exclusive for the international arbitration field. I think this is a reality in all the society. So I think that the thing here is that we need to understand that we are not all the same, that we are not, we don't fit in the same suite. So I think that in that logic, we will obtain better results if we respect the difference. So that is, I think, the point here. Yes, of course, the ICC Guide on Disability offers a good roadmap of the type of things that should be done in the world of international dispute resolution generally. Of course, I recommend it to read the guidelines. Of course, the guidelines now address all the possible circumstances that we are talking, and of course is limited in that sense, but introduce the topic, as Paolo said, introduce the topic on the table and helps us to work and incorporate disability issues in the arbitrary proceeding. And I think that this is here, the thing is that it's always need a balance act, not here. We need to always work with the balance between the efficiency and the fairness. And here, when we are talking about disability, I think that we have the two principles, the principles of efficiency, cost, and fairness. They are very important in that sense. So I believe that these guides are a concrete step. And that is the road to progress, the real progress, no?
Most certainly. And then you can ask the question, are we there yet? Because I mainly work in the field of civil procedure nowadays, and I've also been wondering, like, how does this actually work with court proceedings? Are we now perhaps ahead with arbitral proceedings by having such a thing? Because I think this is the ICC guide is probably the development of many, and probably our other institutions will pick up on it at some point. But we should not only be looking into arbitration in general, we should be looking into civil procedure, criminal procedure, courthouse structures. It is a way broader topic. And once you become aware of how broad that topic actually is, then you can do something with it. Paolo, what are your views on that?
Tess, I think you might open the proverbial Pandora's box with this, because I mean, arbitration and arbitration professionals, parties, and the whole deal have a huge advantage. It's private. So if they want to appoint us, if they want to give us a job, they will do that. If they don't want us, fair enough. We can't force anyone to appoint us or to give us jobs. It's how the private market works. But I mean, I haven't entered courthouses in a few years now, luckily, not as a lawyer, not as a party interested in the case, but I've been there, and I've been there with my wheelchair, and sometimes they were accessible. Most of the time, I had to go through several hurdles. So if we move to civil procedure, then it's no longer a private thing, it's a state thing, and there is no reason why we could accept lack of accessibility, lack of translations, lack of overstimulation, sensorial stimulation. And think about Italian courts, for instance, and anyone with ADHD or any form of autism will probably be driven crazy by the mess of civil courts in Italy, because it's like being at the food market, literally. And I remember when I was practicing there, I would struggle sometimes because I couldn't understand whether the thing that was shouted in my ear was my name, the name of my client, or something completely unrelated. So in terms of accessibility, I'm talking accessibility in the broadest sense of the term, not just wheelchair-based. There are lots of steps to be made. And I think you raised a valid point that I hadn't thought of before. We can't really demand full accessibility in the world of arbitration when, in fact, the litigation world is not accessible just yet. And until wheelchairs and other physical disabilities and all kinds of other impairments that have an effect on work become normal in a courthouse, then we can't really ask for that to be in arbitration. And to an extent, I think the ICC guidelines show that, at least from that perspective, the arbitration world is one step ahead of the rest of the litigation world. And it should be the other way around, but it's us. We're the pioneers of this, so let's just bring it to courts if we can.
Erin, do you also have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I also was laughing at Paolo's description of the Italian courts. My partner is Italian, so I'm very excited to tell him this after the webinar. But no, I mean, I think we've spoken a lot also about the notion of people understanding the needs of persons with disability. And I think it's also, in a positive light, important to also, part of the importance of communication and exposing, dissecting these topics is that it also helps to recognize the abilities that remain in people. Because I think we had discussed also in the pre-call that, there tends to be this perception, and again, it's a bit of ignorance and so on, but that, once someone is so-called disabled or even perceived to be disabled, they sort of get painted with a brush and then put into a different box. And then once you're in that box, it's very, very difficult to convince some people that you can live outside of it, and going to Veronica's point as well, that everybody is different, with any disease, any disability, it will affect people in a different way. And I think what's very, very important and what really appeals to me from the ICC guidelines is this notion of accommodation, because to me, accommodation also means acceptance, right? And if you're going to be making reasonable efforts to accommodate someone and include them in a process, I mean, a lot of these reasonable efforts, I've heard some of the objections to that in certain discussions where they said, oh, but it can be very expensive, it will add too many costs to the proceedings. I think many of these reasonable accommodations can be as simple and the same price range as making sure there's a vegetarian meal compared to like a meat one. Some of them can be very, very simple. So I would encourage, and I hope that by talking about it more and more, we sort of normalize this in a way and move it away from being this buzzword or, a poster child or something like that. But just making sure that persons with disabilities, visible or invisible, have a proper place that they deserve in the community as well.
I'm sorry, but it's incredible for me. I don't know, Courtney and Nikola, what do you think or feel? But listen to Erin using the term reasonable accommodation. It's incredible because we work a lot about this concept and the scope of this concept. So it's incredible for me. It's the first time I hear someone talk about the reasonable accommodation. So it's great. I think that this is the idea, no?
It is exactly the idea. And I think that's exactly the point. Let's keep talking about it. So people know what it is. I was at lunch not too long ago with a friend of mine who's a partner at a very large international law firm, and told him we were doing this discussion, and he knew that I was part of the task force and said something like, "That's great, but how does that affect us?" Right? I mean, at this point, we've all earned our seat at the table. And I said, but sometimes you need to make sure you can get in the building before you can get to the table. And I gave just little examples. For example, I had a client once who was diabetic, and he needed every now and then to check his blood sugar, and we needed breaks. A 10 or 15-minute break isn't going to cost the world. And realistically, we have them set in our schedules anyway for hearings. So let's just make sure it's at a convenient time for this witness. And putting it into that perspective, it's sort of, I think the broader community realizes that, you know what, we're not asking for the world. We're just asking for a little more thought to go into it. And I think that's great. We have word from the ICC that people are actually including reference to the ICC guide in their procedural orders, and they're talking about it, which is what we want. So let's keep doing that.
And at the same time, we also need to show people how it actually works, which is why we're doing the event at Baker McKenzie on the 26th of March. Look it up on the Vis Moot event calendar if you want to find it. But Courtney will there in a mini moot form address the practical application of the guides, and we'll also continue part of this discussion at Baker McKenzie. I'm very much looking forward to see all of you in person. Now, in the interest of time, we need to wrap up. So I would like to ask you, Paolo already touched a bit on it, like if I would have to give any advice to my younger self, it may be a bit difficult, or to someone younger because you ended up in a wheelchair later in your life. But nonetheless, if you also looking back at this conversation, like if you would be approached by a younger student asking, well, what are the things that I should do, or what are the things that I should in any case take into account when I want to get into the world of arbitration, what would be your advice?
I'll rip a page from your book because a few minutes ago you used a term that really resounded with me, that was internalizing. And I will basically channel my inner Robin Williams talking to Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting. And I'll just tell my younger self or any student, it's not your fault. So stop thinking about how much it's going to cost to accommodate your needs, and just become the best version of yourself, become the best lawyer you can be, and then demand the seat at the table because, as Courtney was saying, you earned it. And if to accommodate the seat at the table, the community will need to lower the table or put a ramp at the beginning, or just talk quietly, or just provide transcriptions and things, so be it. It's not my fault that I was born with a tumor.
Oh, microphone has changed to mic.
It's none of your faults that you were born with the disabilities that you guys have. It's not our fault. So that's advice I would give my younger self and any younger person. Don't internalize. Just, go and demand what's yours. Tess, you're still muted.
Sorry, Nikola, I see you have unmuted yourself. Do you have anything to add?
Am I unmuted? Yeah. Well, so going back to your question, Tess, I would actually point out two things. First of all, it's always important to be self-confident. Don't allow yourself that your disability makes you less confident in your abilities, professional abilities. And the second point is, as Paolo already mentioned, don't think that you are a burden to someone, and don't think that the reasonable accommodation are actually a huge burden. That is something that we need in order to function as anyone else in the world of arbitration. And that's not our fault, that's what we deserved. And on the other hand, again, this is not a burden, this is just an enrichment for the world of arbitration, making it more diverse.
Thank you very much for that. Veronica.
Yes, of course. Well, I think that my advice, I think that maybe not be afraid. Learn to deal with your disability first and foremost. Always had a positive attitude and think about to your strength, know your weakness, and improve your skills always, because you have, of course you have, I'm sure that you have a lot of skills. So the secret is to discover which are and work on that, because I think that this is the most important thing. Try to find where are your strength, where are your goals, the things that you are better, and find it, because maybe there are a lot of models. I heard Tess about the standard model, no? Which is the standard model? And I think there is not a standard model. And the thing is that you have to find your own model, and that is, I think, the most important that I have to say, because I don't know, I'm not an important person or a person who know everything and a lot of experience. It's only my view, and of course, I'm very happy to share with you and the opportunity to share with you. But I think that is the important thing. Be what you are and find the things that make you better person, better professional, and of course, make things for the field that you are working. For example, in this case, international arbitration. I think that more diversity, inclusion will be very good for the improvement of the international arbitration.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Erin, you have any final words?
Yeah, it's actually, Veronica, I echo what you said. I was going to say you stole a little bit what I was going to say, but how it articulated is really just to ignore labels and models. Like, don't allow yourself to be boxed in, because, you know, just because Google says something the way it's supposed to be, or the profession says, you know, lawyers or arbitrators are supposed to be a certain way, or a disabled person is supposed to be a certain way, doesn't mean that it's true, and doesn't mean you have to live within that cage. You know, I think there's a lot of scope, there's a lot of potential to innovate, and that is absolutely necessary if we talk about inclusion and diversity. And indeed, just because the statistics, you know, says something about what your disability might do in future or today, you know, there may be statistics pointing in one direction, but there are also a lot of statistics pointing in the other. So don't allow yourself to be defined by a label or a number or any person's opinion, really.
Thank you, everyone.
I have to ask, do you have any final words?
See, I was going to cut us off because we're coming to the hour mark. I would say stick with it. If I were telling my younger self something, and I tell young sort of students who approach me as well, stick with it, keep going for what you want. It's worth it. So.
Just to add on to that, there's two things that I would say to my younger self. Is first, don't think you're weird. Don't think you're weird because you're different. It can actually be a huge benefit to you, but you first need to understand yourself. And the second is listen to others, be open to their experience, and don't assume that what you have is the same as anyone else, because everyone's experience is unique. And the only way in which you find out what that experience is to ask, and then to listen. Actually listen. So on that account, I think we can conclude the conversation, Courtney. Thank you very much. We look very much forward to see almost everyone. Sorry, Veronica, not you, but at the 26th of March. And again, thank you very much, Rafa, from the ICDR for hosting this conversation. It's been a real pleasure. And yeah, please keep spreading the word and emphasize this very, very important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you.